In this part of the lesson, I'm going to look at finishing off this lineup by duplicating these parts and then replacing them with new images and text. So the first thing I'm going to look at is my image itself, and this is a little bit of a tricky one. Basically, what I need to do first is to pre-compose this layer here, which is my main image. So I'm going to right click and hit pre-compose, and I'm going to call this new comp picture 1, and everything stays pretty much the same. I'm going to go inside that, and you'll see that there's my original composition now sitting inside here. And what I actually want is the animation of my picture sliding up and down to be on this pre-comp here and actually not on the image itself. I just want to use the image inside this composition to compose it or frame it inside the square. I don't really want it to be moving. So just by taking note of where my keyframes are, 1, 2, 3, let's just count that properly. It's 11 frames. And that's about 13. So I'm just going to go drop my timeline marker in the middle here and click the stopwatch to delete that animation, and I'm just going to remake it inside this new comp here, picture 1. So this composition, which is just called 1, it's just going to house my picture. Picture 1 has the pre-comp inside it, which is now in this square format. So I'm just going to redo this animation quickly. Key the position there, and then about halfway I'll key it again, go back to the beginning, and then just holding down shift, I'll just drag it outside the frame, make sure it's all the way out, and then again at 4 seconds I want it to be gone. And then I just want to grab these two inner keyframes and hit F9. And I'll just tweak the graph here as well. Let's see, I'm going to have to use the speed graph, sorry. Let's just frame that nicely. And I'll pull these handles out like that, so I've got a nice easing. I'm just going to go back to my main comp and check that I haven't completely ruined everything. That looks fine. Then you'll notice my reflection is not moving. What I need to do is to grab my reflection and replace it with one of these. If I click the layer name here to look at the source name, this shows me which compositions I'm actually using over here. Picture 1 is the pre-comp I just made. This one here is still just number 1, so now the animation doesn't exist on that one anymore. I need to replace it with a picture 1. So with this composition selected, I'm going to come up here and look for picture 1, click and drag. I'm going to hold down the Alt key on my keyboard, and while I'm holding down the Alt key, I'm going to release the mouse button, and that replaces the comp with picture 1 instead of 1. It also keeps all its attributes, so it's still in the same place, it's still scaled upside down, it's got the effect on it, it's a 3D layer. And now that animation is back again. Okay, so if you can wrap your head around that, let's move on. The next thing that I want to do is to make some duplicates of these compositions. So I'm going to have to make a duplicate of one of these, which is just housing my image. I'm going to make 1, 2. So I'm just clicking on the composition here and pressing Command D to duplicate it. I'm going to have to make duplicates of picture 1, which is now the comp that has the animation on the picture. Command D once, twice, or Control D if you're on a PC. And then the text as well, once, twice. Okay, so now I've got some kind of structure emerging. However, if I go into picture 2, you'll see that it's still got comp 1 inside it. I need to replace this with a comp 2 here. So I'm going to, with this layer selected, click and drag while holding down the Alt key, and replace it with 2. And you'll notice that by replacing the image or replacing the comp, it also keeps the animation. So I can now go into comp 2 and just replace the image. So I can replace it using the Alt technique, or in this case I can actually just delete that one and drag the new one inside it. And I'll just scale this image down, frame it the way I want it, and now in picture 2 I've got that image sliding in and out. The reason for having this sort of network of nested compositions is it just allows me to do things a bit easier. If the animation was on this image and I had to move it around and scale it, I would be making things a little bit more difficult for myself. But in this way, it's a little bit more easy once you've grasped the idea of how nested compositions work. So now I'm going to have to go into picture 3 and replace this comp with an number 3 comp over here. So with that selected, I'm going to click and drag this number 3, hold down the Alt key, and release the mouse button. And I can go into 3, find the picture, delete it, and replace it with the new picture. This is quite a big one, so I'm going to scale that down. And I'll just frame it nicely there. I've got all the characters except that guy, but that looks pretty good. Okay, the next thing that I want to do is go into these new text comps I've created and update the information. So text 1, which looks like this at the moment, that's not going to change at all. Text 2, I need to update this information. So with my text tool selected, I'm just going to double click on there and update the title. And I'll just give it a new time. Let's say this starts at 8:30. And the age restriction is, let's say, 16 SL. Then I'm going to go to text 3. And this show is called The Thick of It, and let's say this one starts another hour after that. It's 21:30, and this one is going to be, I don't know, let's just make this up, 16 language and violence. So then my animation is still the same, the text layout is still fine. Now I've got all these extra comps I can close some of these up. I don't really need to see them anymore because I'm pretty much done with them. So now back in my main comp, I'm going to lay this out. So one of these lasts 4 seconds. So I'm going to go to the 4-second mark here. Select all of these layers except the bottom two there. So I've got the text pre-comp, the picture pre-comp, the duplicate of the picture pre-comp that I'm using is the reflection, and then the gradient, which I'm using as a track matte. And I want to come right to the end of the layer, and the cursor changes here to 2 little arrows pointing outwards, and I can grab the end and just cut it off at that point, so the layers only last that long. If I can't quite see exactly where I am, then I can just zoom in a bit, but I've got my timeline marker on just the right point there. Now I'm going to select all of these layers again, and I'm going to hit Command D or Control D on a PC, and it's going to duplicate all of them. And I'm going to slide, just by grabbing these layers anywhere in the middle of them, slide them up so they begin here. So I've got this kind of thing going on. I'm also going to just drag this up just to rearrange them so they're all grouped together. Duplicate them once more, slide them over to 8 seconds. Again, drag them up there. And now I've got the timing of my whole lineup laid out like that. But at the moment, I've just got the first picture 1, text 1 repeating itself 3 times. So what I want to do is come over here to the second one, and I'm going to take text 1, just select it here, and I want to replace that with text 2. So I'm going to click and drag text 2 anywhere on the timeline, hold down the Alt key, and while I'm holding down the Alt key, release the mouse. And it now replaces text 1 with text 2. Now I need to do the same for not just the picture, but the duplicate that I'm using as the reflection. So I'm going to select both of those and just repeat the process like that. So now that's been replaced with picture 2. This one's going to be text 3 and picture 3. So there I've got my whole lineup, and it's a lot easier to manage. So from this point on, if I wanted to go and update these, I would just go into these individual comps, say this one, and just replace the picture. We'll go into this one and just update the text, and then I can just go and render and be assured that all the animation and effects and layout stays the same. There's one more thing that I want to do just with regards to the reflections actually. They could look a little bit better. What I want to do with the reflections is I want to change the blending mode from normal to overlay. And it brings in some of that blue from the background, sort of inherits it, which it would in real life if it was actually reflecting on a surface of that color. So it gives it a little bit more of a realistic look. Also, I want to just take the opacity of the whole layer, which is under transform, and bring it down a little bit, maybe like 55%, just so it's not so bold and a little bit more subtle. I want to do that for all of my reflections, so let's just do these ones as well. Picture 3 and picture 1, overlay. And if I want to bring up the opacity quickly, I can just hit the T button on my keyboard. T for transparency, if you like. Let's see, it's this one here. I'm still looking at the source name of the layers, so you'll notice that, for example, these two have the same name because the source is called picture 3. If I click here again to show me the layer name, you'll see that it's become a little bit of a mess with the reflections. This should be actually called reflection 1, reflection 2, and reflection 3, just to keep things a bit more organized. I can also, just for the sake of making it easier over here, change the colors of these groups of layers. Just so they stand out distinctly on the timeline. So there is my lineup, all nicely organized, everything's labeled, and it's going to be really easy for me to update this in the future.